Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're going to talk about a method that many successful English learners use, learning through stories. One of the most powerful ways to learn English is through stories. It is also a very natural and enjoyable way. When you read or listen to English stories, you're not just memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. You're seeing how English is actually used in real life. You hear natural sentences, you follow conversations, and you see how people express their thoughts, feelings, and ideas. Stories also make it easier to remember what you learn. When you learn through stories, you're not only studying new words, you're also connecting words to characters, situations, and emotions. This helps new vocabulary stay in your memory much longer. And later, it becomes easier to recall. Another good thing about stories is that they help you improve many skills at the same time. While enjoying a story, you can build your vocabulary and understand grammar more naturally. You can improve your reading and listening skills, and you become more familiar with everyday English. Over time, this can even help you speak English with more confidence. In this video, we'll look at 10 practical tips that can help you learn English faster and more naturally through stories. Whether you're just a beginner or you've been learning English for years, these tips can help you learn more effectively while enjoying the journey. Now, let's move on to the first tip. Tip 1. Live inside the story. Many English learners read stories in the wrong way. They look at every new word and quickly open a dictionary. They try to understand every sentence perfectly. That makes reading slow and tiring. After a few pages, they feel bored. However, there is a better way to learn English with stories. When you read, do not think only about words. Instead, try to enter the story. Imagine the people. Imagine the place. Imagine the feelings. In other words, do not read like a student all the time. Read like a person who is watching a movie inside the mind. For example, read this sentence. The little girl stood alone in the rain. This sentence is very simple. Maybe there are no difficult words, but do not move too fast. Stop for a moment and imagine the scene. Perhaps the sky is dark. The street is quiet. The girl feels cold and sad. Maybe her clothes are wet. Maybe she is waiting for someone. Now the sentence feels alive. This is important because the brain remembers feelings and pictures more easily than grammar rules. When English becomes emotional, it stays in your memory longer. Let's look at another example. Tom opened the door slowly and looked around the empty house. Again, the sentence is easy, but a good learner does more than read the words. A good learner imagines the house. Is it dark? Is it silent? Why is the house empty? Is Tom afraid, nervous, lonely? Little by little, English starts to feel natural. Many learners think they must understand 100% of the story. But actually, this is not necessary. Even children do not understand every word when they hear stories. Still, they continue listening because they want to know what happens next. You can learn the same way. Sometimes you will see unknown words. That is okay. Do not stop every minute. First, try to understand the meaning from the story. Use the situation, the emotions, and the actions to help you. For example, Emma's hands were shaking when she answered the phone. Maybe you do not know the word shaking, but you can still guess the meaning. Emma is probably scared or nervous. Her body reacts to her feelings. This kind of learning is powerful because it is natural. Stories are not only for studying English. Stories are experiences. They make you laugh, worry, relax, or feel excited. And when you feel something, your English becomes stronger without too much effort. So the next time you read an English story, slow down a little. Do not only look at the words. Enter the world of the story. Listen to the rain. See the empty room. Feel the character's emotions. Then English will slowly become part of you. Tip 2. Read the same story. Again and again. Many learners always look for new stories. After they finish one story, they quickly start another one. They think reading many different stories will help them improve faster. At first, this idea sounds good. However, there is a problem. When you read something only one time, your brain does not have enough time to remember the English deeply. A few days later, many words disappear from your memory. That is why reading the same story many times is actually a very powerful method. Do not worry. Reading again does not mean doing the exact same thing every time. Each time, you focus on something different. During the first reading, you only try to understand the story. You follow the characters and the plot. You do not stop too much for grammar or vocabulary. You simply enjoy the story. Then, when you read the story a second time, everything feels easier. The characters are already familiar. The situation is already clear. Now your brain has more space to notice useful English expressions. Maybe you suddenly notice sentences like, "She took a deep breath," or "He looked away quietly." Perhaps you did not pay attention to these expressions before, but now they become clearer. During the third reading, you may start noticing emotions, sentence patterns, or small details. You begin to feel how English moves naturally from one sentence to another. For example, a few minutes later the phone rang again. Or, from that day on, her life slowly changed. A few minutes later, or from that day on, are very common story phrases. When you see them again and again, they become natural in your mind. After that, on the fourth reading, try listening to the audio version of the story. This step is very important. Because you already know the story, listening becomes less stressful. You are not fighting to understand the meaning anymore. Instead, your ears begin to recognize pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. At first, the speaker may sound fast, but after listening many times, the English becomes clearer little by little. Then comes another powerful step: speaking. You can pause after each sentence and repeat it aloud. For example, the old man smiled warmly at the little boy. Try saying the sentence slowly, then say it again with emotion. Imagine the scene while you speak. This helps your speaking sound more natural. Finally, on the fifth reading, you can try retelling the story in your own words. This does not mean memorizing the story perfectly. You only need to explain the main idea using simple English. For example, maybe the original story says, Anna missed the last bus and walked home alone in the rain. You can retell it like this. Anna could not catch the bus, so she walked home by herself while it was raining. Different words, same meaning. This is excellent practice. Many learners are surprised by something important. The second or third reading is often much more enjoyable than the first one. The story feels more comfortable. The English feels less heavy. You start reading faster and understanding more naturally. This feeling is a sign of progress. So do not always look for new stories right away. After finishing a story, try spending more time with it before moving on to the next one. Sometimes one simple story can teach you many things if you stay with it long enough. A short story read 5 times can help you more than 10 stories read only once. That is because real learning needs repetition. The brain learns slowly, step by step, like water filling a cup little by little. So choose a story you truly enjoy. Read it again tomorrow. Then read it once more next week. Each time, the English will feel a little more familiar. And one day, you will realize something wonderful. You are no longer translating every sentence in your head. You are simply understanding the story naturally. Tip 3. Learn groups of words, not only single words. Many English learners study vocabulary one word at a time. They open a notebook and write long lists like this: hungry, nervous, tired, difficult, promise. Then they try very hard to memorize everything. Sometimes this works for a short time, but after a few days, many words disappear from memory. Even worse, some learners know many English words but still cannot speak naturally. When they try to talk, their sentences sound strange or incomplete. Why does this happen? Because native speakers usually do not think in single words. They think in groups of words. For example, native speakers often say, feel nervous, deeply worried, break a promise, fast asleep, heavy rain. These word groups are called chunks. Learning chunks is one of the best ways to improve natural English. Stories are wonderful for this kind of learning because stories use the same natural expressions again and again. Let's imagine you only study the word sad. It is not very memorable by itself. But now look at this sentence. Lisa sat by the window with tears in her eyes. This sentence gives emotion and a clear picture. Even if the word sad does not appear, you can feel her sadness. Or look at this example. My heart sank when I heard the news. This expression is very useful in stories and daily English. My heart sank means you suddenly feel disappointed, worried, or shocked. Now imagine learning only the word disappointed from a vocabulary list. Which one is easier to remember? Usually, the story expression stays in your mind much longer because it has emotion and context. Here is another example. Jake could barely speak. Maybe you already know the words could, barely, and speak. But together, they create a natural expression. It shows strong emotion. Perhaps Jake is scared, shocked, or extremely nervous. This is how stories teach real English. The good news is that you do not need to memorize thousands of chunks every day. In fact, it is better to learn slowly. When reading a story, try noticing useful expressions like took a deep breath, looked around quietly, burst into tears, stared at the floor, after a while, without saying a word. These chunks are very common in storytelling. They help your English sound smoother and more natural. You can also practice using them in simple sentences about your own life. Here is an example. I took a deep breath before my exam. Or another example. My mother looked at me without saying a word. This step is important because the brain remembers better when the language becomes personal. Another good idea is to collect chunks instead of single words. You can keep a small notebook or phone note, but do not write too much. Choose only expressions that feel useful or emotional to you. Maybe you like this sentence. The room fell silent. Or, she forced a smile. These expressions are simple, but they are powerful in stories and conversations. Little by little, your brain will start connecting words naturally. Then speaking becomes easier because you are no longer building sentences one word at a time. Instead, you begin using ready-made pieces of English. This is one reason why some people sound natural even if they do not know difficult grammar. They have heard and read many useful chunks. So the next time you read an English story, do not only search for new vocabulary words. Look for natural word groups. Listen to how the words work together. Because in real English, words rarely live alone. Tip 4. Read easy stories, not difficult ones. Many English learners believe something very common. If a book is difficult, it must be good for learning. That is why they often choose stories that are far above their level. The book may have many difficult words, long sentences, and complicated grammar. At first, learners feel excited. They think, this book is advanced, so my English will improve quickly. But after a few pages, something happens. Reading becomes slow. The dictionary opens every 2 minutes. The story no longer feels enjoyable. Sometimes the learner understands almost nothing, so they stop reading completely. This problem is very common. In reality, easy stories are usually much better for language learning. When you read something easy, your brain can relax. You understand most of the sentences without too much effort. Because of this, reading becomes smoother and more enjoyable. This is very important. Language grows faster when the brain feels comfortable. For example, imagine a beginner trying to read a difficult sentence like this. Upon realizing the devastating consequences of his actions, Jonathan reluctantly abandoned his original plan. This sentence is not impossible, but it is heavy for many learners. Now compare it with this. Jonathan understood his mistake, so he changed his plan. The second example is much easier, and because it is easy, the learner can focus on the meaning instead of fighting the grammar. Some learners worry about this. They think, if I read easy stories, maybe I will never improve. Actually, the opposite is often true. Easy stories help you build speed, confidence, and natural understanding. When you read many simple sentences again and again, your brain slowly learns English patterns automatically. For example, after reading many stories, sentences like these begin to feel natural. She opened the door quietly. He sat beside his father. A few moments later, the lights went out. At first, you may still translate these sentences in your head, but after enough exposure, you start understanding them directly in English. This is one of the biggest goals in language learning. Children learn language this way too. They do not start with difficult books. They begin with very simple stories. The sentences are short. The vocabulary repeats many times. Slowly, their understanding becomes stronger. English learners can follow the same path. In fact, many successful learners spend a long time reading graded readers, children's stories, or simple slice-of-life stories. These books may look easy, but they contain a lot of natural English. And most importantly, they help learners continue reading every day. Consistency is more important than difficulty. Reading one easy story every day is much better than struggling with one difficult book for a month. Easy stories also help listening skills. When the vocabulary and grammar are simple, your ears can recognize English sounds more easily. You stop panicking every time you hear a new sentence. Little by little, English starts to flow naturally. Another important thing is enjoyment. When you enjoy a story, you want to continue reading. You become curious about the characters. You want to know what happens next. This feeling keeps you learning without forcing yourself too much. That is why many learners suddenly improve after they stop reading difficult texts. They finally begin understanding instead of surviving. So, do not feel embarrassed if you read children's stories, graded readers, or simple books. Simple English is not bad English. Simple English is often clear, natural, and powerful. Even many native speakers enjoy simple stories because good storytelling is not about difficult vocabulary. It is about emotion, imagination, and connection. So choose stories that make you feel comfortable. Choose books where you can understand most of the meaning. Let yourself enjoy the reading experience. Then, step by step, your English will become stronger naturally. Tip 5. Listen to stories, not only read them. Reading stories is a wonderful way to learn English. It helps you learn new words, understand how sentences work, and enjoy interesting ideas. However, many learners make one common mistake. They spend most of their time reading and very little time listening. As a result, they can understand English on a page, but they struggle when they hear people speak. Have you ever experienced this? Perhaps you read a sentence and understand it easily. But when a native speaker says the same sentence, it suddenly sounds unfamiliar. You may wonder, why can't I understand it? I know all these words. The reason is simple. Written English and spoken English feel different. When people speak, words connect together. Some sounds become weaker. Some words seem to disappear. Because of this, listening is a skill that needs its own practice. Fortunately, stories can help. When you listen to a story, you are not listening to random sentences. You are following characters, actions, and events. The story gives your brain context, and context makes listening much easier. For example, imagine you hear this sentence. The little boy ran to his mother and hugged her tightly. Even if you miss one or two words, you can often guess the meaning from the situation. You know what is happening in the story. This is why stories are excellent listening material for learners. A good method is to start with a story that matches your level. First, read it once to understand the plot. Get familiar with the characters and the main events. Then listen to the audio version. Because you already know the story, you do not need to worry about understanding every detail. Instead, you can focus on the sounds of English. At first, the speaker may seem fast. This is normal. Many learners feel frustrated during the first listening. Do not give up. Listen again the next day. Then listen again a few days later. Something surprising often happens. The story becomes clearer each time. Words that sounded impossible suddenly become easy. Sentences that once felt fast begin to sound natural. This happens because your ears are slowly learning how English sounds in real life. Another useful technique is called shadowing. The idea is simple. Listen to a sentence and repeat it immediately. For example, if you hear, "She looked out the window and smiled." Pause the audio and say the sentence yourself. Try to copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. Do not worry if your pronunciation is not perfect. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to train your mouth and ears to work together. At first, you may sound slow. You may make mistakes. That is completely normal. Every learner starts this way. As you continue, you will notice something interesting. Certain expressions begin to stay in your mind. You no longer need to think about every word. Instead, whole phrases appear naturally. After a while, all of a sudden, without a word, to his surprise. Because you have heard them many times in stories, they start feeling familiar. Listening also helps you understand emotions. When you read a sentence, you see the words. But when you listen, you hear the feelings behind them. A sad voice sounds different from a happy voice. A frightened character sounds different from a confident one. For example, compare these two situations. I found it and I lost it. In the first situation, something good happens. You were looking for something and then you found it. The feeling is positive, so the sentence ends with an exclamation mark to show excitement or happiness. In the second situation, something bad or disappointing happens. You no longer have the thing, or you cannot find it. The three dots show that the speaker's voice trails off. They may feel sad, disappointed, or worried. Instead of ending strongly, the sentence feels unfinished, which helps the reader understand the speaker's emotion. The words are simple, but the voice tells you much more. Stories help you hear these emotional differences naturally. Over time, listening becomes less like a school exercise and more like enjoying a movie or a conversation. So do not only read stories, listen to them too. Read with your eyes, but also learn with your ears. The more stories you hear, the more familiar English will become. One day, you will notice that you are no longer translating every sentence. Instead, you simply listen, understand, and enjoy the story. Tip 6. Retell stories in your own words. Many learners believe they must create perfect English sentences before they can speak. Because of this, they spend a lot of time studying grammar, memorizing vocabulary, and worrying about mistakes. However, speaking does not become easier simply because you know more grammar rules. Speaking becomes easier when you learn to express ideas. One of the best ways to practice this skill is by retelling stories. The method is very simple. First, read or listen to a story. It does not need to be long. In fact, short stories are often better. After you finish, close the book or stop the audio and try to tell the story again in your own words. You do not need to remember every sentence. You do not need to use the same vocabulary. You do not need to make it perfect. Your goal is simply to communicate the main ideas. For example, imagine the original story says, a poor farmer found a small puppy near a river. He took the puppy home and cared for it. A few months later, the puppy became a strong dog. When you retell the story, you can say, one day, a farmer saw a puppy near the water. He brought it home and looked after it. Later, the puppy grew into a big dog. Notice something important. The words are different. The sentences are different. But the meaning is almost the same. This is exactly what we want. Many learners think retelling means memorizing. Actually, it is the opposite. Retelling teaches you to use English freely instead of repeating it like a machine. At first, this may feel difficult. You might stop often. You might forget words. Sometimes you may not know how to continue. That is completely normal. When this happens, do not panic. Use simple English. For example, perhaps you forget the word river. Instead of stopping completely, you can say, "A farmer found a puppy near some water." The sentence is simpler, but communication continues. This is a very important skill. In real conversations, native speakers do this all the time. When they cannot think of a specific word, they explain the idea in another way. Good communication is not about knowing every word. It is about finding a way to express yourself. As you continue retelling stories, another wonderful thing happens. Your vocabulary becomes active. Many learners know hundreds or even thousands of English words. They can recognize these words while reading. However, when they try to speak, the words seem to disappear. This happens because passive vocabulary and active vocabulary are different. Reading helps you recognize words. Retelling helps you use them. Imagine reading this sentence. Sarah took a deep breath before opening the letter. You understand it while reading. But later, when you retell the story, you might say, Sarah was nervous. She took a deep breath and then opened the letter. Now the expression becomes part of your speaking vocabulary. The more often you do this, the easier speaking becomes. Retelling stories also helps you learn how stories are built. Without studying complicated writing rules, you begin to notice common storytelling patterns. For example, a story often starts by introducing a person. Then a problem appears. The character tries to solve the problem. Finally, something changes. After hearing and retelling many stories, these patterns start feeling natural. As a result, your own storytelling improves. You become better at talking about your experiences, describing events, and explaining what happened during your day. You may even notice this in simple conversations. Instead of saying, "My day was okay," you might naturally say, "This morning something funny happened. I was walking to work when I saw a dog chasing a pigeon." Suddenly, your English feels more alive. Another great thing about retelling is that you can make the story your own. You can change small details. You can add extra information. You can even imagine a different ending. For example, maybe the original story says, "The boy found his lost bicycle." You could retell it like this. The boy found his bicycle behind an old building. He was very happy because he thought it was gone forever. Now you are not only practicing English, you are also practicing creativity. And because the story becomes personal, your brain remembers the language more easily. At first, try retelling only a few sentences. Then try one paragraph. Later, try an entire story. Do not worry about mistakes. Do not stop every time you forget a word. Keep speaking. Keep telling the story. Little by little, you will discover something exciting. The stories you once read will become stories you can tell. And that is when English truly starts to belong to you. Tip 7. Learn story phrases, not just grammar rules. When people begin learning English, they often spend a lot of time studying grammar. They learn about tenses, articles, prepositions, and sentence structure. Grammar is important, and it helps us build correct sentences. However, grammar alone does not make a story interesting. Imagine a learner who knows many grammar rules but does not know how stories are usually told. Their sentences may be correct, but the story may still sound unnatural. This is where story phrases become very useful. Story phrases are expressions that writers and speakers often use when telling a story. These phrases help connect events, show time, create suspense, and guide the reader through the story. The good news is that you can learn many of these phrases naturally by reading and listening to stories. For example, many stories begin with simple expressions like one day, a long time ago, one morning. These phrases immediately tell the reader that a story is beginning. Then, as the story moves forward, you often see phrases such as a few minutes later, after a while, later that day, soon after that. These expressions help connect different events smoothly. Without them, a story can feel disconnected. For example, look at these sentences. Tom left the house. He arrived at the station. He got on the train. The meaning is clear, but the story feels a little flat. Now look at this version. Tom left the house. A few minutes later, he arrived at the station. Soon after that, he got on the train. The events flow more naturally. Story phrases are also useful for creating surprise. Imagine reading this. Emma opened the door. Her best friend was standing outside. This is fine, but now compare it with Emma opened the door. To her surprise, her best friend was standing outside. The second version creates a stronger feeling. The reader can almost experience Emma's surprise. As you read more stories, you will discover many expressions like these. To my surprise, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I couldn't believe my eyes. Little did I know. These phrases appear again and again because they are useful tools for storytelling. Another important group of story phrases helps describe emotions. For example, my heart started racing. She took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. Tears filled her eyes. These expressions do more than tell us how someone feels. They help us see the emotion. Instead of saying, Sarah was nervous, a writer might say, Sarah took a deep breath and looked at the floor. The second sentence creates a picture in the reader's mind. This is one reason stories are such good teachers. They show emotions instead of simply naming them. As you continue reading, try paying attention to these useful expressions. When you find one you like, write it down. Do not only memorize the individual words. Learn the whole phrase together. For example, instead of learning only the word surprise, learn to my surprise. Instead of learning only the word suddenly, learn all of a sudden. Your English will sound much more natural. You can also practice using these phrases in your own stories. Imagine you want to talk about your day. Instead of saying, I went to the store, I saw my friend. You could say, I went to the store. To my surprise, I saw an old friend there. Or perhaps, I was walking home when all of a sudden it started raining. These small changes make your English more interesting and easier to follow. The best part is that you do not need to memorize hundreds of phrases at once. Just collect a few useful ones from each story. Read them. Listen to them. Use them when you retell stories. Over time, they will become part of your natural English. And one day, when you start telling a story, these phrases will come to your mind automatically. You will no longer spend all your energy thinking about grammar. Instead, you will focus on sharing ideas, emotions, and experiences. That is how stories are meant to be told. Tip 8. Notice how characters think and react. When people read stories, They often pay attention to the events. They want to know what happens next. They want to know whether the hero succeeds or fails. They want to know how the story ends. Of course, these things are important. However, good stories are not only about events, they are also about people. Think about your favorite stories. Most of the time, what makes them interesting is not the event itself. It is the way the characters think, feel, and react to what happens around them. This is why paying attention to characters can help you learn English more effectively. Imagine two simple sentences. Jack lost his wallet. This tells us what happened. Now look at this. Jack checked his pockets again. Then he checked them one more time. For a moment, he just stood there and stared at the ground. This version tells us much more. We can see Jack's reaction. We can imagine his worry. We can understand his situation without the writer directly saying, Jack was worried. Stories teach English in this natural way. Instead of telling us emotions, they often show emotions through actions and reactions. For example, a writer may not write, Sarah was nervous. Instead, the writer might write, Sarah took a deep breath and looked away. Or, Sarah's hands were shaking. These descriptions create a picture in the reader's mind. At the same time, they teach useful English expressions. As you read stories, try asking yourself simple questions. What is the character thinking? Why did the character make that decision? How did the character react? What would I do in the same situation? These questions help you become more involved in the story. They also help you understand the English more deeply. Let's look at another example. Imagine you read this sentence. Tom heard a strange noise outside his window. Many learners immediately continue reading because they want to know what happens next. But slow down for a moment. The next sentence might be, Tom froze. He listened carefully and did not move. Now we learn something about Tom. He does not immediately run outside. He does not shout. He freezes and listens. This reaction tells us about his thoughts and emotions. As you continue reading stories, you will notice many useful reaction phrases. She hesitated. He frowned. She looked around nervously. He remained silent. She nodded slowly. He could not stop smiling. These expressions appear again and again in stories because people react to situations every day. In fact, learning reactions can be extremely useful for speaking and writing. Imagine you are telling a friend about something surprising that happened. Instead of saying, I was surprised, you could say, for a few seconds I just stood there and stared. Or, I did not know what to say. These expressions sound more natural and more interesting. Another benefit of studying characters is that it helps you become a better storyteller. Many beginner storytellers only describe events. We went to the beach. It started raining. We went home. The story is clear, but it feels a little empty. Now compare it with this. We went to the beach. Suddenly, dark clouds appeared in the sky. My sister looked worried. My father checked the weather on his phone. A few minutes later, it started raining, and we quickly ran back to the car. The second version feels more alive because it includes reactions. Good stories are full of reactions. People laugh. People hesitate. People worry. People make mistakes. People change their minds. And every reaction teaches us useful English. So the next time you read a story, do not focus only on what happens. Pay attention to what the characters think. Pay attention to what they do. Pay attention to how they react. You will discover that stories are not only teaching you vocabulary and grammar, they are teaching you how real people behave, think, and communicate. And little by little, these patterns will become part of your own English as well. Tip 9. Focus on clear communication, not perfect English. Many English learners have a dream. They want to speak exactly like a native speaker. This is understandable. When we watch movies, listen to podcasts, or hear native speakers talking, their English sounds smooth and natural. They speak quickly. They use many expressions. Sometimes they even make English sound easy. Because of this, many learners think they must speak the same way. However, this belief often creates a problem. Instead of focusing on communication, learners focus on perfection. Before speaking, they worry about grammar. While speaking, they worry about pronunciation. After speaking, they think about every mistake they made. As a result, they become nervous and speak less. Ironically, trying to sound perfect can slow down learning. The truth is much simpler. The main purpose of language is communication. If people understand your message, then communication is successful. Imagine that you are traveling in another country. You want to buy a bottle of water. You do not need to say, "Excuse me, would it be possible for me to purchase a bottle of water?" You can simply say, "Can I have a bottle of water, please?" Or even, "One bottle of water, please." The message is clear. Communication happens. That is what matters most. The same idea applies when telling stories. Many learners stop speaking because they cannot find the perfect word. For example, imagine you want to tell a story about a storm. Perhaps you forget the word lightning. Some learners immediately stop talking. They think, "I don't know the word, so I can't continue." But successful communicators do something different. They find another way to express the idea. Take a look at this. There was a big storm. Bright flashes appeared in the sky. Maybe it is not the perfect sentence. Maybe it is not exactly what a native speaker would say. But people can understand you. That is a victory. Stories are excellent practice for this skill. When you retell a story, you often forget certain words. This is completely normal. Instead of stopping, keep going. Use simpler English. Use different words. Explain the idea. For example, imagine the original story says, "The old man was exhausted after walking for hours." Maybe you forget the word exhausted. You can simply say, "The old man was very tired after walking for a long time." The meaning is still clear. In fact, many native speakers do this too. They do not always choose the most advanced vocabulary. Often, they choose the clearest vocabulary. Another common mistake is trying to use difficult grammar too early. A learner may know a simple sentence like, "I was happy when I saw my friend." But instead of using it, they try to build a much more complicated sentence because they want to sound advanced. Sometimes the result is confusion. Remember this: simple English is not bad English. Simple English is often strong English. Many famous stories use simple sentences. Many successful speakers use simple language. Their goal is not to impress people. Their goal is to be understood. As you continue learning through stories, you will notice something interesting. The more stories you read, listen to, and retell, the more natural English becomes. Useful expressions start appearing automatically. Sentence patterns become familiar. Speaking becomes easier. This growth happens naturally. You do not need to force it. Think about a child learning a language. A child does not wait until every sentence is perfect before speaking. The child simply communicates. Mistakes happen. Learning happens. Progress happens. English learners can follow the same approach. Do not be afraid of mistakes. Do not wait until your English is perfect. Do not compare yourself to native speakers every day. Instead, focus on one simple goal. Can people understand me? If the answer is yes, you are already succeeding. Over time, your vocabulary will grow, your grammar will improve, your pronunciation will become clearer. But these improvements come from using English, not from waiting for perfection. So when you tell a story, focus on sharing the story. When you have a conversation, focus on sharing your ideas. When you speak English, focus on communication. Because the goal of language is not to sound perfect. The goal of language is to connect with other people. And that is something you can start doing today. Tip 10. Make stories part of your daily life. Many people start learning English with great enthusiasm. They buy books, they download apps, they create study plans. For a few days, everything goes well. Then life becomes busy. Work takes time. School becomes stressful. Family responsibilities appear. Before they realize it, a week passes without any English practice. This happens to many learners. The problem is not always the study method. Often, the real problem is inconsistency. Learning English is similar to growing a plant. You cannot pour a bucket of water onto a plant once a month and expect it to grow well. Instead, you give it a little water every day. Language learning works in a similar way. A small amount of English every day is usually more effective than many hours of study once a week. This is one reason why stories are so powerful. Stories are enjoyable. People naturally want to know what happens next. Because of this, stories are easier to turn into a daily habit. Imagine two learners. The first learner studies grammar for 3 hours every Saturday. The second learner spends 20 minutes reading or listening to a story every day. After a few months, the second learner often makes more progress. Why? Because English becomes a regular part of life. The brain learns through repeated exposure. Every day, it sees familiar words. Every day, it hears familiar sentence patterns. Every day, it spends a little more time thinking in English. These small improvements slowly add up. At first, 20 minutes may not seem like much. However, 20 minutes a day becomes more than 10 hours every month. After a year, it becomes more than 100 hours of English exposure. That is a lot of learning. The good news is that daily story practice does not need to feel like hard work. You can read a short story while drinking coffee in the morning. You can listen to an audio story while walking. You can read a few pages before going to bed. The important thing is not the exact amount of time. The important thing is showing up every day. Some days you may have plenty of free time. On those days you can read longer stories. Other days may be very busy. On those days, even 10 minutes is enough. Remember, a short study session is always better than no study session. Another benefit of daily stories is that they help keep English fresh in your mind. Have you ever noticed that after a long break, English feels harder? Words seem less familiar. Listening feels more difficult. Speaking becomes slower. This happens because the brain needs regular contact with the language. Daily stories solve this problem. They keep English active. Even a short story can remind your brain of vocabulary, sentence patterns, and pronunciation. Over time, English begins to feel less like a school subject and more like a normal part of life. This is an important change. When English becomes part of your daily routine, learning feels easier. You stop asking yourself whether you should study today. You simply do it because it is part of your day. Just like brushing your teeth, just like eating breakfast, just like checking your messages. Many successful learners are not successful because they are smarter than everyone else. They are successful because they stay consistent. They keep showing up. They keep reading. They keep listening. They keep enjoying stories. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. And eventually, all those small daily sessions create something amazing. One day, you will open a story and realize that you understand much more than before. The sentences feel easier. The vocabulary feels familiar. The story flows naturally. That progress may seem sudden, but it is not. It is the result of many small steps taken every day. So do not worry about studying for hours. Do not worry about finding the perfect schedule. Instead, find a story you enjoy. Read a little today. Read a little tomorrow. Then do the same the next day. Let stories become part of your daily life. And little by little, English will become part of your life too. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Also, subscribe to my channel for more English learning videos. See you in the next video.